Hey everyone, Kyle from Andrew Hilton here to tell you about our upcoming beer tasting for Wednesday, June the 2nd at 6 o'clock.
No.
Annex, Blindman, Cabin, 88. These are not breweries we struggle to sell. These are category leaders.
But
Sometimes there's a man left behind. There's a beer that just doesn't sell as well as the rest of the beers from that brewery. And that's what we're going to explore tonight. Meats and Bounds is actually one of the very first two beers that Annex launched with, and it's still in their portfolio. It's their slowest seller. Blindman Long Shadows IPA sold really, really well. And then Blindman NEPA came out, took over the world, and people come back like, oh yeah, Blindman makes another IPA. They do, and it's a kick-ass one, and we should talk about it more. Cabin Sunshine Rain. I am almost sick of beating this drum, but Cabin Super Saturation, our #1 selling beer in the store, great IPA. We sell buckets of it. Do we sell a lot of Sunshine Rain? No, and that's a shame. And then finally, well, this should be 88 Hologram Wheat Ale, but it's not. It got ignored so hard they actually don't make it anymore. It's been replaced in their core range by the Hammer Pants Northwest Pale. So we're going to do the Tiffany, the complicated wine must-made pink Saison from these folks. Absolutely fabulous beer, but again, it's not the fastest selling thing that they have. Tasting kits are $20 as always, and all of that and more coming up Wednesday, June the 2nd at 6 o'clock. Can't wait to see you out. Man, I really got to stop putting all of my preamble for the upcoming tasting in the promo, because that just killed everything I was going to say for the next 5 minutes. Welcome, everyone, to our Wednesday night beer tasting number 57. And as you probably gleaned from the promo, we are talking about unloved beers. Now, these aren't beers that have been, lovable losers their whole lives. Like I said in the promo, the Annex Meats and Bounds was one of their 2 launch beers, and it has continued to sell well enough to the present day that 4 years on, long after its stablemate, the bitter division that it launched with, is long dead, and honestly, I'm not sure how many people even remember bitter division. Meats and Bounds keeps going on. And let's get some of that in our glasses while we keep talking about it. Now, I want to dig into a little bit why, a beer maybe, wow, that was a great pour. 2 inches of beer, 4 inches ahead. Wonderful. Well done. Good job on a Wednesday night. But yeah, I want to dig into a little bit about why some of these beers are here. I don't think any of these beers have ever been, things that went over like a lead balloon. None of these beers are considered failures. But I do want to talk a little bit about what they all have in common. All 4 of these beers are core beers for their breweries. They're not seasonals, they're not one-offs, they're not test cases. Some of them were with the brewery at launch, some came later. But all of them have worked their way into the core range of each of these breweries. I was able to follow up on this. I wasn't able to get a firm answer on Tiffany. I actually think in its case it was, but at least for the Sunshine Rain, the Long Shadows, and the Meats and Bounds, these weren't beers that started out as seasonals and became so incredibly popular. I love that I immediately got a foam much comment. They weren't beers that started out as a seasonal and became so ludicrously popular that they had to become a core beer. Like, say, the 88 Ring Pop did, or indeed Establishment Jamrock. These are beers that launched as being part of the core range, and perhaps at one time in their history did really, really well, and then slowly died back. Fancy pop-ups. Yeah, we've had a lot of really good pop-ups lately. Aaron, if you haven't watched the promo for Cantankerous Cocktails, you really ought to, because it looks absolutely spectacular. Eric asked, Tiffany is last. Yes, and I thought about this. I actually had it originally before I tasted these about 20 minutes ago. I had it first before all the IPAs. Then I actually had it between the Meats and Bounds and the Long Shadows. And then I had it between the Long Shadows and the Sunshine Rain. And finally, the high alcohol, the big wine component is just so different, and it's so big. It can follow these IPAs, I think, very well. But you're right, fitting the Tiffany in with this range was really difficult. Another thing I do want to point out is one thing that all of the first 3 beers have in common. All of them are, to one way or another, I mean, we'll talk about what the Meats and Bounds is in a minute here, they're all not hazy pale ales. They're all IPAs or hoppy pale beers that aren't the hazy type. And that's a recurring theme I think we'll come back to throughout the evening is, Meets and Bounds is wonderful, and Forward Progress in its way isn't really a hazy pale ale, which is Annex's best-selling core beer, but Force Majeure sure as heck is, and so have like the last 3 or 4 seasonal IPAs, perhaps with the exception of Dimed Out, that Annex has done. They've all been hazies. So thought vigorous pours were good because they help express the CO2 and agitate precipitate. Yes, that is true. But it also gives you a fuck ton of head that I don't really need on the beer. So, you know, you take your goods and your bads. So, all right. So let's dig into Meets and Bounds. Like I was saying, along with Bitter Division, which was an ESB style, which I haven't had in a very long time, this was one of Annex's first 2 launch beers 4 years ago. They're going for an extra pale ale, which is a style that I can remember being around. I can remember drinking a lot of AleSmith XPA whenever I was in California. I can remember Lagunitas had an XPA. It was kind of like a higher alcohol cross between like a West Coast pale ale and an English bitter. You'd almost see them as like a West Coast take on a more traditional East Coast IPA before East Coast IPAs became hazies. So if you wanted to think of this as a Californian in mid-2000s, say 2005, saying, you know, we're making these really great super pale California, San Diego, San Francisco style IPAs, but what if we had a little bit more backbone? What if we had a little more sweetness? What if we had a little more alcohol? That's what the extra pale ales tended to be. And they were somewhere between a super old school IPA and kind of that mid-2000s, early 2010s California style. So they'll have really bright, pretty fresh hops in the nose, but they'll also have a really stiff, rich, kind of malty, roasty backbone to them. Roasty is the wrong term. Toasty would be better. And oh yeah, caramel backbone right there. Eric's right on it. Absolutely. And I'll pose this to the crowd here. Other than the Meets and Bounds here, even including the things that we've done with our beer tastings recently, when was the last time you had a beer that had this much of like a caramel backbone in terms of something that was at least in the conversation or an IPA? I don't really remember what the last one I would have had like this. Maybe the Johnny Lake, which is a bit of a throwback from Tail Gunner. They've got kind of a really, really old school, almost English style IPA. But it's not a style that's really done anymore. But I will say that 4 years ago, this was, again, before Blindman New England Pale came out, or just about as it was coming out. This would have still been really contemporary, really something that people would have gotten behind. And I can see why this was, when Annex first launched, by far and away their best seller. This was their very first big home run beer, before Force Majeure and Forward Progress and Good Authority and their current summer seasonal Idle Hands, before all of that. Meets and Bounds was, to a certain point, the beer that built Annex. And for, I know, as Rupert was saying a couple of weeks ago, for the folks at Annex, it's one of, like, the big favorites at the brewery still to this day, because it's offering something nobody else is doing. Everyone and their mom offers a hazy IPA, sometimes 3 or 4 or 5 different ones. 88. But I don't know if anybody else is doing this style. Now, the hard question would be, does it still belong to be a core beer for a brewery in 2021? I think there's a home for it, but if it is their slowest seller, maybe I'm just hopelessly old-fashioned. Let's see what the comments are saying. What are we feeling? Well, Kevin's having trouble not drinking the whole can immediately, so I'm going to call that a ringing endorsement. Great color. Yeah, subtle hops. I think you're right. And you know what's funny? Even 5-8 years ago, I don't think anybody, if we had this channel 5-8 years ago, you know, if Annex had existed 5 to 8 years ago, I don't think anybody would have said subtle hops. I think somebody will have said, this is too bitter, this is too over the top. What are they doing? This is just pure hop juice. It's too bitter. It's too alcoholic. How are they doing this? This is just a mess. But now, current context, it almost tastes malty and rich and like, oh, I could have this all day long because it's so soft. And I think that's, yeah, that's fun. And yeah, Craig, I agree that it could be a core for sure because I think it offers something very different. And I would point out that in Annex's core range, there is no stout, there's no porter. They do usually do like a darker beer for winter, but they don't have like a year-round darker beer. This is about as dark and as like malty as they do. And Eric says it was the first pint he ever had in their tap room. You know, I don't know. I would think that the Meats and Bounds would have been the first pint of Annex I ever had. A, because it was one of the first two, and knowing who I was 4 years ago, and let's be honest, who I still am, I would have definitely had the extra pale ale ahead of an English bitter. That's just me. So I'll almost guarantee Meats and Bounds was my first Annex beer as well. Aaron, what do you think of the Meats and Bounds? Mm-hmm. Good, yep. Good comment.
Good.
Really got a good commentary going here.
Yep.
Lots of words.
Use your words.
Just reading Eric's comment here about the malt focus will be confusing, but it feels like it's bringing balance. Well, this is how, when I started drinking IPA, most IPAs and pale ales were made, is they all had this big, rich, sweet malt background because either it was the hops that were available at the time or how people traditionally brewed them or just, you know, history and culture of IPAs at the time. IPAs weren't really made as dry as we're going to get into with like the Sunshine Rain. And they also didn't do the nifty trick of, say, adding lactose back or doing slightly less complete fermentation like you do with hazies. If they wanted sweetness in their beer, they did it the old-fashioned way by adding some really sweet, lightly toasted or caramelized grains to their beer to give you that big, rich, thick, malty, sweet background that would play against the hops to give you bitter sweetness rather than just pure bitterness. This is, you know, for 400 years, kind of how we had sweetness in beer was caramelized grain. We didn't really do it any other way. But yeah, I think you're right. Maybe a little bit of an artifact in the sense that it doesn't really fly. Like, we're not going to do hazy IPAs tonight because most of the hazy IPAs, for the most part, A, sell, and B, if one doesn't, it's because it's a crowded market, and that's not really that interesting a topic to talk about. I mean, hey, this hazy IPA doesn't sell. Why doesn't it sell? Because there's 500 better ones. Right, next beer. We can't really talk about that. That's why we don't have a hazy on the table. All of these do sell for a variety of different reasons, or don't sell for a variety of different reasons, none of which are, you know, they're just the weakest beer in their style. I don't think that's the case for any of these. Sometimes live in the shadow of another beer. Sometimes the style that they are is maybe just a little old-fashioned or a little bit of out of fashion. I could do just a middle-of-the-road hazy that doesn't sell, but there's tons of those, so we're not going to do that. Who else in Alberta is making an EPA? Ooh. You know what, Eric? I don't think I can name a single other brewery in Alberta or otherwise that's still like currently making something in this style, an extra experimental pale ale. So it's, in a sense, got the entire market to itself. It's a style most people never think about, but it does have the market to itself. That was a brilliant way to start the night. Let's move on to number 2. Now for number 2, we're going to go on to Blindman Long Shadows IPA. Beer I had a pint of last night, actually. So Blindman Long Shadows. The second beer, as far as I'm aware, that was ever launched by Blindman. This is a marginally better pour. I just have a bad hand tonight for it. So Blindman rolled out in 2015 with their River Session Ale. In 2017, they came out with the New England Pale, and everything changed, and hazy IPAs became a thing. And to D. We've covered that story 100 times. But in between those two occurrences, Blindman launched with Long Shadows IPA. So the River Session was lovely, and it's still lovely. You know, it's a low alcohol, nice hops. It's got a lot of oats in it, which gives it kind of a nice creamy mouthfeel. Like, in terms of a beer that you can get almost at any liquor store in Alberta these days and isn't desperately expensive and still sells well enough that it's almost always fresh when you get it off store shelves, it's a bit of a winner. I'd say that it might be one of the cornerstones of the Alberta craft beer scene is Blindman River Session. But you know, once I got all on board the Blindman train and they announced they're going to make an IPA, I said, oh, well, you know, I'm Kyle Baines. I'm so fancy. What are you doing for your IPA? And Shane looked right at me and he said, you know what? We think we're pretty close to Russian River's Pliny the Elder, and we're going to keep brewing it until it tastes as close as we can possibly get it. And the recipe will never stop being tinkered with until it's perfect. As far as I'm aware, it is now done. I did check back a little bit. The gravities and the SRM, nothing has really changed. They might swing the hops around a little bit seasonally, but it seems to be more or less set in stone. And when this first came out, oh God, the Long Shadows, like 8-10 flats a week comfortably. Does Apex have an XPA? They might do, but for whatever reason, I can't give Apex Predator away, so I actually don't know. For whatever reason, it's just not a brewery that sells for us. I like their beer. I actually like their beer a great deal. And when they first launched as Bench Creek, I sold tons of White Raven IPA. But yeah, Apex Predator, just for whatever reason, I bring it in, I put it on the shelf. It sells before it goes bad, but that's about all I can say for it. It's not a matter of I don't like the beer. It's a matter that it just, as a brewery, doesn't sell, which is kind of fun on like tonight's topic. But on that one, I honestly don't know why. I mean, maybe it's the fact that I don't get the seasonals like as readily as I get some of the stuff from Calgary. Maybe it's the fact that maybe they just don't have as strong a social media game. Like when 88 or Cabin or Establishment put out a new seasonal, I start getting like calls within 5 minutes of going up on Instagram. And I just don't get that with Apex Predator, and I don't know why. My knowledge of Apex Predator is purely limited because I can't sell it. It doesn't sell for us. Do we need to have an Apex night? I'm not going to read the second half, Eric, because it's too good. But someone from Apex might be watching, and I'm not going to say that on camera. But yeah, I do like that. Really, Long Shadows was a permanent tap at Pop South. Good for Pop South. That's a heck of a thing, and that's actually very interesting because yeah. Before Blindman NEPA came out, Long Shadows had like a year, or at least had one perfect summer where it was just the beer everyone wanted. Like I can remember getting calls from Blindman. It's like, Kyle, we just sent 2 pallets of Long Shadows up to Connect. They're going to release in the next 20 minutes. You need to order it now. And that was what it was with this beer. It wasn't the complete off-the-rails insanity of the New England Pale a year later, but when Long Shadows came out, it was huge. It was absolutely huge. It had massive momentum, and don't get me wrong, this is not a beer that just sits on the shelves and collects dust. We still have Long Shadows diehards that still buy it all the damn time. But not like they do the New England Pale. I still probably sell a flat of Blindman NEPA to every 4-pack of Long Shadows because it just got buried by, the beer that started the hazy pale ale, hazy IPA tidal wave in Alberta. It was made by the same brewery. It was in the same style. How do you compete with your own incredible, ineffable success? I would almost argue that if, say, Annex had actually invented the Blindman NEPA and it had been Annex's NEPA at the time, I think Blindman would have worked a lot harder to market Long Shadows against it. But I think when Blindman saw that like the NEPA was just going to be their infinite money machine forever, which it was, they kind of said, well, Long Shadow does enough. It'll be fine. It can just be over here. And we'll just they can keep driving the dump trucks full of money up to our house. That's being very cynical and that's, perhaps not fair. But I do kind of think that Blindman Long Shadows had a lot of momentum and a lot of interest And then when the NEPA came out and Blindman just saw what an absolute gigantic monolith they had on their hands as a brand, the Long Shadows just kind of got shuffled off to like the corner to kind of sit and do its thing. That's a shame. I'd actually like to see maybe a bit of a Long Shadows revolution, or maybe a new version of Long Shadows, like a dry hop version of it, kind of to capitalize on the new West Coast, Best Coast kind of underground scene in IPA right now, where everybody's rediscovering West Coast IPAs. I'd love to see that with this. But I think in this case, it just got buried by the biggest tidal wave in brewing we've ever seen in the province. Were there such a thing as Connect panic orders? Oh, Eric, I am just barely old enough to remember the Bud Light Lime and Smirnoff Ice panic ordering. I can remember literally piling up a pallet of Bud Light Lime just inside our front door, and just opening the front door and it being gone within an hour and a half because, you know, it got out that we had Bud Light Lime that day. I can remember I came a little bit late to the Smirnoff Ice party. It came out when I was about 17, I want to say. And when I joined the store and I turned 18, I was probably like 16. It was still big, and it was still hard to get, but it wasn't what I'm told was like the absolute, like, Smirnoff Ice came out and it was gone in seconds. Pink Whitney was really like that for a while there too, although everyone immediately forgot about it once White Claw came out. And White Claw was really like that for a while too, especially in the earliest days of the pandemic. White Claw was like, if it came out, it was sold out in about 5 minutes. Like, you had to be sitting at your computer ordering it on the second. Which, to be honest, I couldn't really be arsed to do because I don't like getting up that early. So that's why we didn't have a lot of White Claw, is I don't need to be up in the morning at 5 to order vodka seltzer online and then just go back to bed for 2 hours. No, thank you. No. And Craig says is more of a nerd beer than their core. I think it's become so, and I actually think it's become so because this was the IPA, this was absolutely cutting edge. I want to very hesitantly say the best IPA in Alberta, full stop, before, okay, it was absolutely the best IPA brewed in Alberta. I'm trying to time this against when Lagunitas got bought by Heineken and it all went to hell. So I'm guessing it was a window of time after this came out, and after Lagunitas got bought by Heineken and went to shit, where this genuinely was by far the best IPA sold in Alberta, hands down, full stop, no questions asked. But it was a very brief time. And then the New England Pale came out and just took over the entire world. It's interesting you say that this is more like a niche beer, a nerd beer, because this was designed to be an absolute crowd pleaser. It was built on one of the best-selling IPAs of all time. But you're right. I mean, I like this, but I'm a giant West Coast nerd. Whereas the Meats and Bounds, I think, fills an unusual role in the sense that, you know, there aren't many extra pale ales out there. They don't have a stout or a porter, so if you want something with a little more of a malt backbone, this is what they got. I think the Long Shadows, which is a newer beer, I think Craig might be right. Maybe this does have a little bit more of a, either it needs a rebrand and a relaunch, or maybe it has kind of just lost its way and become a little more of a nerd beer. I don't know. I think it's an interesting case on this one. I actually thought this would be one of the more popular beers tonight, purely on memory, and a lot of sentimentality. I love this beer. Of all the beers in the Blindman catalog, this is actually the one I buy the most. Not because I'm an insufferable hipster, because I really like Long Shadows. I like this West Coast style IPA. Here's the million-dollar question from Deirdre. So in our tidal wave of breweries in Alberta, how does one stand out or get noticed? What is the key to discovery? Well, if you actually could put a really good theory to that, you'd be a wildly successful brewery in Calgary that would be the envy of everyone else. I don't know. I mean, there are breweries that have really, really strong social media games. Like 88 is just a social media darling, as is Cabin. Establishment does some, but they don't. They seem to be more just embraced by the hardcore beer drinkers, and they have this really diehard local following. Annex was there in the very beginning, and I think they got painted a little bit with the same brush as some of the other breweries that popped up in that same era, which wasn't the best period for opening some new breweries in Calgary. And I also would say that as much as I like Meats and Bounds, I don't think Annex's earliest beers were anywhere near as strong as their beers now. But I don't know. There are breweries that have like a massive upswelling of support and then kind of fall by the wayside. I'd say Outcast kind of fills in that. Like for a while there, like it was just before 88 and Cabin opened, like all I was hearing was Outcast, 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 Outcast. And I went up and I tried the beers and they were great. And then when they came into cans, the entire market just reacted with this giant shrug, and they're fine. But like their one hot moment really lasted like a second. I don't know. I don't know what really it takes to be a great brewery in terms of sales. I don't know how you hit that sweet spot of, great sales and also making good beer and also being respected by your peers. I don't know. It's such a crowded market. How do you stand out above that background noise of what everyone else is doing? I think having really like sharp marketing, or sharp packaging like Cabin has, or really savvy marketing like 88, or just consistently making quietly excellent beer like Annex does. There certainly is, but even for me as a retailer, like there's 5 or 6 or 8 breweries that just, they're the cream of the crop, and everybody else is, absolutely whipping their horses to try and catch up with that crowd, and it's very rare that some do. I will certainly say it's not impossible to break into that. Before the pandemic, I'd never heard of SYC, and they started like calling us and sending us samples, and we're like, your beer rules, we want to have that. SYC's been nothing less than an absolute discovery for us. It does fantastic. Pineapple FOMO was on one of our 5 best-selling beers last summer, and probably will be one of our top 10 this summer. The Pontificato Pils is probably our 3rd or 4th best-selling beer this year still. Like, it just does fantastic for us. But you know what? I don't know. I think it's got to be some combination of good packaging, if not great, a good social media presence, and at least some interesting content other than just, this is our beer, come to our cheap wing night on Wednesday night. I don't know. You need a certain message, and then making great beer is just the other one. Oh, wow, we got so many questions. I love this. You're worried long shadows are going to be overshadowed by sunshine rain? Well, that is why the sunshine rain does come after the long shadows. It has to be second because it is bigger than the long shadows. But it also came out either 2 or 3 years after long shadows. So I think it's 3 years. So that's not fair. The beer market had changed. This predates Blindman NEPA. This is afterwards. So we can't really compare them in the same breath. And yeah, being around other breweries must help. We have what is now very controversially called the Barley Belt, ever since Labatt Banded Peak got involved in that whole nonsense. No comment on the Barley Belt thing. Like, it's gotten really ugly and contentious, and I think it's taken a bit of a nap because the tours and everything that were going on, obviously went away with COVID. But I know a lot of the breweries aren't happy with sharing like a tour bus with a Labatt's own brewery, and rightfully so. The law that prevented small breweries from existing in Alberta for the better part of like half a century were bought and paid for by Molson and Labatt.
Boo!
They shouldn't be allowed to be on this Barley Belt tour. No, that's gross. And the fact that they would be on it, I completely understand why the breweries are not on board with it. So it'll be interesting now that things like those, pedal bike tour buses of drinkingness can, kind of continue again. It'll be interesting to see what comes out of the Barley Belt, because yeah, that's a sticky one. Ooh, maybe I missed this, but what my establishment choice for this tasting be? It was going to be Pilsner. It didn't make it onto the table because I actually was almost out of Pilsner, and establishment hadn't canned it yet. And second reason, we have an establishment theme next week, so we're going to get a lot of establishment in us in the next 7 days. So don't you worry about establishment. But yeah, Pilsner is kind of a core beer, kind of not. It's technically not a core, but it seems to be available broadly 12 months of the year with a couple like 2-3 week gaps every now and then. It's fantastic, but it keeps being overwhelmed by the fact they keep putting out really awesome seasonal lagers. Like, Pilsner is a great Pilsner. It is. But when you put out things like Mellow Gold and Part-Time Model and their new one that they just came out with, Gold Past Life, and you keep making these absolutely stunning one-off Pilsners and one-off lagers, your one core lager is not going to do that well. It's not like having, they have 2 IPAs in Skyrocket and Afternoon Delight that are very good beers, and they always seem to have a seasonal IPA. Well, IPA is this giant category. Pilsner's like this little tidewater over here. It's not the same market. You will struggle to sell your core Pilsner if you're always making super awesome limited one-off lagers. It's a sized of market sort of thing. And I think that's why the Pilsner isn't a huge success. And also the fact that I could sum it up that easily in like 2 sentences. Yeah, it wasn't a great fit. Also, yes, Tainted Love I love, but I think we are actually out of Tainted Love now, so we can't talk about it. And yes, Molson would just get their ass handed to them. Food for Clouds is next week. I've been confirmed for 8 flats. It's not going to be on the tasting next week because we have to, make up the tastings tomorrow. And I'm not going to Calgary until Tuesday next week. So Wednesday morning on the shelves, we will have Food for Clouds, yes. But it won't be on the tasting next week. Clearly poured myself way too much Long Shadows there. That took forever to get through. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't.
Oh, you got plenty, Aaron. Okay, so one thing I will point out with all of these, all West Coast styles, all clear IPAs, which is not something when I was putting this together that it occurred to me, but it did occur to me about 20 minutes before we started when I was, lining these up and tasting them. It's like, oh, why don't all these sell? Oh, they're all West Coast IPAs in the East Coast market. I did not realize that when I was putting this together, but that is, to a certain point, the one-sentence answer to all 3 of these beers. They're West Coast styles in the East Coast market. But the Cabin Sunshine Rain, I think, is a really interesting test case because Cabin sells really well. We sell tons of Cabin. Their Super Saturation, big news coming on that front, is our best-selling beer in the store. Absolutely it is. But Sunshine Rain, still, and I know when we did our big New England Pale Ale head-to-head challenge with this and Afternoon Delight and a few others, I genuinely had Super Saturation as my number 1. Unashamedly loved that beer, thought it was fantastic. I still always want Sunshine Rain in my glass, in my body, in my belly. This is what I want. I love this beer.
Brassy.
This fits me like a glove. Sean with an excellent question. Speaking of Pilsner, are you going to bring in more Luminosity? Yes, and I forgot on Monday. And I forgot again today. Luminosity, the reason we don't have it is Cabin took all of the Luminosity after the very initial release and they shipped it all up to Connect. And that'd be great if they told me. And they didn't. I just found out the other bloody day. So no, Cabin took all the Luminosity and they sent it up to Connect. So any store can order it. Great. But I'd have taken 10 flats Luminosity if they told me it was available at the brewery, but they told me it was out of stock. But they neglected to mention that if I just ordered it from Connect, I could get it any time. So yes, I will be getting Luminosity back. Just miscommunication between me and Cabin. And yeah, Molson, I do want to just briefly touch on Jeremy's comment is Molson really does just seem to get their ass handed to them every which way but loose. I mean, they bought Granville Island and then just, immediately stopped selling it into Alberta, which was actually at that point a slightly larger beer market for Granville Island than BC. and then they kept it out of Alberta long enough that the Alberta beer scene exploded, and then they brought it back. We're like, look, Granville's back. Please buy it in the same volumes you were buying it before. To which everyone collectively shrugged and just bought Lion's Winter and basically pretended that Granville had never existed. Coors Light follows Bud Light by a mile. Canadians, distantly in the rearview mirror, both Bud Light and Kokanee. I mean, they have a bit of a winner with Pilsner, but it's a discount brand. I mean, trying to think of the last time Molson had a winner, and it might be before my lifetime. Yeah, I really think that, as much as any big brewery, buying a small craft brewer is the kiss of death, and it really, truly is. I've never seen it where a small craft brewery, no matter how many incredible promises of, oh, it's just an investment, oh, we're going to be super hands-off, within 3 years that brewery's dead. But Molson seems to even accelerate that process, which is honestly kind of admirable in a way. It's like Newton Pulsifer's skill with electronics and Good Omens. Like it's almost like the inverse of talent. It really is. It's quite spectacular. Have we heard anything from Tail Gunner lately? I haven't heard anything specifically, but I also haven't heard any bad news that would lead me to worry. Their IPA does okay, I wouldn't say well, but their Pilsner still does very well for us. So at least for us, I've got no concerns from Tail Gunner. You never see it disappear from our shelves. Deirdre, I really wasn't going to make the comparison that Molson was like the Toronto Maple Leafs of the beer industry, because it was right there. It was on the tip of my tongue. It was, and I chose to be the bigger person. Thank you, though, for not, because you're absolutely right. No, I think Molson's owns the Montreal Canadiens. Pretty sure Molson does not own the Leafs. Oh, come on, this is a dunking on Molson town. They closed our brewery.
Yeah.
Everyone should hate Molson. That's just a real thing. No, you don't get to be a Molson fan in this town. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Sunshine Rain, why I like it.
Yeah.
I believe it was Sean that said, it was either Sean or Eric said that this was going to bury the Long Shadows. And it does, but it's a much newer recipe than Long Shadows. It's a much more recent beer. It has more residual sweetness, for one. I believe it has a touch less alcohol. Yes, it does, just a hair. It's bright, and it's fresh, and it's fruity, and you can definitely tell it's a relationship to super saturation. Yes, it's clear. Yes, it's a West Coast IPA. But can't you just taste the cabin super saturation DNA in it? You really can. And I don't mean that in a very dismissive way. I mean that in I like super saturation. I like West Coast IPAs. For me, this is just the best of both worlds. I like the fact that this has some super saturation. This is like West Coast IPA, but with all the lessons learned from New England Pale, kind of shoved into it. And I really like that about it. What's going on with Toolshed? I don't know. And forgive me if I keep rolling this. I don't know. It's because with COVID, I don't get sales calls anymore. And unless I get a phone call, an email, I see something on social media. The fact that, this is literally my job to know, and I'm not seeing anything from these breweries, means that either they're not doing anything or they're doing a spectacularly bad job of telling everyone. Like when Establishment brings out a new beer, I get 4 emails about it. When Cabin brings out a new beer, I don't need to get an email because I get 5 phone calls about it from customers before Cabin's basically announced it anywhere except Instagram. Annex is actually really awesome. Rupert will text me 2 weeks before a new beer comes out and be like, this is coming out, tell no one. They're really awesome about that. But no, I mean, there's breweries that are great about communicating. I'll say that actually Grant at Copper in Theory, he's amazing. When he sends out this really well put together newsletter that actually has it's in constant contact. It's one of those I literally get 50 of these emails a day, and it's this is what's on sale. This is what we think is interesting. This section is never interesting because it's stupid and it's shit that they've been selling to 20 years and they're just trying to rebrand it. But basically all I just here's the new shit that you should be excited about. Here's the CSBCs. Here's when they're coming out. You can ignore the rest of the 3/4 of the email. It's there if you want it, which literally no one in the history of the world has ever wanted. But all the new stuff you want is right at the top of the email. They're excellent emails. And that's why I know everything about his brands. It's like he actually writes a good email. But no, a lot of these breweries, like, they're not getting out there. They're not telling stores. I think COVID had scared a lot of breweries, and they either laid off their sales force because, you know, they weren't able to go into bars and they couldn't sell draft beer into D2D. But from that, they stopped just picking up the phone and saying, hey, you know, it's Jim from Toolshed, and hey, do you know we have a new IPA out? All it takes is a phone call sometimes to say, oh, hey, I love IPA. What's your new IPA about? And they're like, hey, it's a New England Pale. We've never had one before. Great. But, you know, if they say something cool, like, hey, it's our brand new, like, passion fruit guava New England IPA that we've made with Queek yeast. You know, I don't love Toolshed, but hell yeah, I'm on board for that. That sounds fun. You know, if it sucks, we'll throw it in the mix for it. It'll go away somehow. Or I'll put it on, like, Super Sale. It'll go away. But if you don't make that call, you'll never sell the beer. I don't know. I worry about breweries that, like, there are breweries that don't have to work hard to sell their beer, it seems like. I know there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes to keep cabin that hot and in people's minds. But there are breweries where they do need to pick up the phone, and sometimes they just don't, and that bothers me. Yeah, Village has kind of gotten lost in the shuffle, haven't they? And that's a shame because I used to drink a ton of Village Maiden, purely because I had a very good friend who I'd watch hockey with at Backstreet South. And the only good beer at Backstreet South back then was Village Maiden. And they always kept like 6 to 8 bottles in stock. So we'd match each other 1 for 1 with Village Maiden so that neither of us drank the lion's share of it. And then we'd switch to Steam Whistle because that was the other beer they had. And when they ran out of Steam Whistle, we just leave. That was more than a few years ago now, mind.
Switch to Kokanee Gold at Backstreet when you've exhausted the resources.
Oh man, Kokanee Gold.
Yeah.
That's a beer that had its day. Wow. It's Kokanee. It's just got a shitload of caramel in it. And now it's $3 a pint more expensive. Sorry, I'm getting really sassy about this.
Awful.
Yeah, it is really bad. But you know what? I drank a lot of Kokanee Gold back when.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
Backstreet South.
In the flood of great breweries, who has gotten lost in the mix? Some of the Edmonton guys, I think, have.
Commercial.
Ooh, yeah, and that's just it. I mean, there are some great breweries. I'd say that... This actually deserves a little bit of serious thought here. Somebody asked earlier, why isn't Dandy as big as, say, Cabin or Establishment or Annex? I think it's because their original beer styles were really esoteric and weird. Like, they had a Dandelion Belgian Gold. And as we're going to talk about with the Tiffany Rosé here, Belgian yeast is really polarizing. I think Aaron tasted the Tiffany Rosé, said, no, that's just that Belgian death for me. Direct quote. He just hates Belgian yeast. And Dandy rolled out with some really strong Belgian yeast notes in their early stuff, and I think that maybe slowed down their early progress. I think Dandy, quality-wise, does get lost a little bit. I really would like to see what Outcast is really doing. I have a bit of an axe to grind with Outcast because when we brought in their cans were basically expired before we got them, which is why all our Outcast cans are actually below cost on the shelf, and in a couple of weeks they're just going to get dumped. We brought them in good faith. We did a tasting with them, and then we checked the Best By dates, and all of the beer we got was like 6 weeks old. And it's like, if I get it right from the brewery, it shouldn't be 6 weeks old. I get that it's COVID, and I get that, you know, maybe you're really struggling with that, but I'd like to see what Outcast can do when things are different. I'm trying to think who else is really underrated. Town Square, I think, is really underrated. I think Town Square makes fantastic beer out of Edmonton. Sea Change as well. Sea Change, I think we are really isolated down here in Lethbridge from what they do. Sea Change, they make that Prairie Fairy, and they make the Wolf New England Pale Ale, and they make a couple other things. But they're really more of like a seasonal brewery. We don't get any of the seasonals down here. I keep hearing that Sea Change in Edmonton is like Cabin down here, and they're like super geeky and everybody loves them, but we never see any of that down here. So I think they're probably a brewery you'd have to go to Edmonton to seek out their cool stuff, or actually go to the brewery. Oh, and Village is apparently brewing with their own like in-house grown hops. That's really cool. And yes, that actually is an excellent point Justin makes. Village makes by far the best alcohol-free beers in the market right now. They make a pale ale, a blonde, and a stout, and all three are as good as I've ever seen them done.
Fully passable.
Fully passable. Yeah, I would drink those without any hesitation whatsoever.
Oh God, we're here, aren't we? We're not here yet.
No, we're not even there yet.
Well, I'm just
Yours is ahead of the curve, Aaron.
reaching for something here. Well, I don't even want that one.
I know you don't. I don't know why you're like all eager for Tiffany when you don't even like it. Yeah. All right. Let's talk about what we have for upcoming events. Friday night. If you have not watched, as I did not because I'm a terrible person, Aaron's animation for the promo for Cantankerous Cocktails. I'm an animated character now. And so's Mike, which is even more entertaining for me for personal reasons.
It would never exist without Eric.
It would never exist without Eric because, yes, Eric did the original drawing, which Aaron then turned around and made into a cartoon, which has been utterly fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about Cantankerous Cocktails. It started off as kind of a one-shot video. We were talking about turning it into a series, but it's so easy to just let things slide, and especially when you have to like bottle up 5 different spirits in different volumes and make them all into kits and include a tiny can of soda water. It's just a ton of work. So Cantankerous Cocktails always kind of got pushed, and it got pushed, and it got pushed, until finally it was like, we were just sitting around like a Wednesday, and we're like, what are we doing next week? I don't know. Let's just do the cocktail thing. No, it's giving me so much work. No, let's just do it. Let's just do it. And we put this together in about 2.5 hours. We made it work. And then the next day we sat down and we realized we got all of our math wrong for the ounces on the cocktails. And we're like, oh shit. Are we still going to have enough? Turns out we just did. We are basically out of the Wild Turkey 101 now. But we got it all together. We are going to be making 4 different cocktails. We are going to be making a perfect Manhattan. That's not to say that our recipe is better than anyone else's, but a perfect Manhattan is American whiskey, either bourbon or rye. We're going to be using bourbon, and then equal parts of sweet and dry vermouth. We're going to be making a Negroni, which is Campari and red vermouth with gin. We are also going to be making a Boulevardier, which is basically a bourbon version of a Negroni. So bourbon with Campari and sweet vermouth. And then because you haven't had enough Campari and sweet vermouth yet, we are going to be making probably my favorite cocktail, especially for like sitting outside in the sun. We're going to be making an Americano cocktail, which is just Campari, red vermouth, and exactly the right amount, almost to the mill, of soda water. So you have to be really careful with making these, but they turn out absolutely spectacular. You want them to glow. Aaron, like lighting request, the cocktail has to glow.
What?
Yep, just use the lighting to make the cocktail glow, even if it completely screw up making it.
Okay.
Now, next week, we are doing Cabin Seasonal Week. We actually happen to have 4 different cabin seasonals, because cabin. Establishment. Wow, that's not going to come back to bite me in the face later. There we go. No, we are going to do Establishment Seasonal Week. We have 4 different establishment seasonals right now. We have Left My Wallet in El Segundo, which is their Pineapple Lichtenheiner. We have Superfusion, which is their Katharina Sour with pink guava. We have the one I can never remember the name of, which is Gold Past Life, which is their Czech-style pale lager. And then finally, we have Marmalade Skies, which is their sour with orange zest and apricot. I wanted to do this for a while. Like, I've been kind of dancing around doing another establishment night because my schedule with the guys at establishment never lined up, or we couldn't get like the beer we wanted. But no, we just said, you know what? We got some really cool establishment right now. We've got 4 different seasonals on the shelf, and establishment is going to make someone available. Direct quote. It might be Dave Ronneberg. It might be Natasha, who's like Dave, but even better. It might be one of the 2 mics. It's gonna be fun. That's our tasting for next week. It's gonna be a laugh and a half because establishment's always a laugh. So that's what's coming up next week. Wine tasting next week. We're gonna go back to South Africa because we are. I know. Sure. We're gonna go back to South Africa, but there's a reason. My friend Eberhard came down from Calgary, and Eberhard comes down once a decade, and he came down with unasked. Eberhard's usually the guy I buy German wine from because he's German and he has really good Riesling, but he came down with all the South African stuff, and we loved it, and we bought a ton of it. And then he phoned us oh Kyle, just so you know, I allocated you all of your wines that you wanted. Willow Park just bought everything else. So there isn't any more wine to buy. So we have enough to do this tasting basically, and then it's gone. And that's our tasting next week.
That's fun.
Yeah, it is kind of fun.
Okay.
Cocktails are not sold out yet, Eric. They are selling very briskly, and like hell I am making another cocktail kit because that took like 11 hours to make those damn things. But they are done.
Jesus.
So Aaron is so angry at Tiffany using Belgian yeast, he is drinking a superfusion like off camera. And yeah, next week should be fun. Okay, let's dip into Tiffany here. Like I said in the promo, I kind of wanted to put the 88 hologram wheat here, but 88 has another core beer, and this is actually one that I believe started out as a seasonal and was such a huge hit for them that it worked its way into their core range. And of the core range now, it is by far our slowest seller. So for those not aware, the core range from 88 is Ring Pop, Night Gallery, Wave Pool, Duotang, and Tiffany, and at least for a little while longer, Good Morning Vietnam. The Tiffany is different. They say on the back it's complicated. Mm-hmm. It's a Belgian Saison made with Belgian yeast, and it's, you know, a spicy, complicated malt grain, and then they make it on top of red wine must to give it that rosé character, to give it that wine character. And it does taste very much like a rosé wine, but it also tastes like a Belgian beer. And if you don't really love both of those things, well, Tiffany might not be for you. So let's dig into Tiffany here. I mean, just the color. Like, it doesn't look like beer. It's actually the color of a really nice rosé. Yeah, rosé wine must, well, rosé wine must, red wine must. I mean, you could use either. It would give you the exact same effect. Depends how long you aged your beer on it. I mean, you could get the same effect from 12 hours on rosé must as you could from 3 on red wine must. It'll still give you the color, it'll still give you the flavor and everything else. Reminds you of the beginning of COVID when I was dropping off at your house on my way home. I remember those days. I still know where your house is. Like a block from mine. Yeah, those home delivery days when I was doing them in my car and it was literally down to me and Devin and Nigel, and like Aaron and I were still figuring this whole thing out. Yeah, no, it was
delivering too.
Oh yeah, like we were just making this happen.
Yeah.
It was a complete shoestring operation. Which is hilarious for a business that's almost 40 years old, but like we were just completely throwing this together out of nowhere. Oh, so yeah, like we're gonna be 40 in like 3 years, 4 years.
Is that right?
That's crazy.
That rules.
I mean, I'm gonna be 40 sooner than that, and so are you.
Yeah.
But the store's gonna be 40, you know, at some point here. Oh, and
Hold it up to
Tiffany.
the light. Yeah, it's like run a little action through it.
Want to run a little action through that?
Pop the thing. Okay. Yeah, good. It's nice. That.
You're just trying to get your use out of your tiny tripod, aren't you?
Yeah, I paid a lot for all this shit.
Yeah, I know you did.
I'm just trying to like.
So, on the back of the can, it says it's complicated. To be honest, this batch of Tiffany reminds me almost more of a wine, especially after the IPAs. Is anybody else picking up more of a wine vibe from this than they are a beer? I certainly am.
Fully.
The color, the aroma, the feel in the mouth with the tannin and the alcohol, because the alcohol's higher at 8. I mean, yes, you get the Belgian yeast, you get the brewer's yeast. It's unmistakable. But I don't know. There's something about this. It's so on the fence between a wine and a beer. And there's lots of, well, I shouldn't say lots. There are some breweries that are doing this. Burdock would be the big one I know out of Ontario. A lot of their beers include actual wine in the beer. I know that Snake Lake for the Mrs. Dingwall's Red Sangria Sour, they use 3 different types of wine must to make that. I know that Establishment's barrel age program, at least, they use a lot of wine grapes in their barrel aging program. Trying to think of another example, but like there's lots doing it. This isn't the only one. And yet it's the only core beer I can think of, the only year-round beer from any brewery that is made this way. Mrs. Dingwall's was delicious, but it was a one-time deal. The Burdocks are great, but like they're released kind of when Burdock feels like it. This is available 12 months of the year. Now, of all of the beers in the lineup, this is maybe the one I would say is better served as a seasonal. I could see this being June through mid-September, and people just being unbelievably impatient for it to come back. When is my weird beer rosé porch climber, like sitting on the patio, regular, like sitting on the back deck in the heat wine ready? I could see that being an absolute madness thing, but because it's kind of on the shelf quietly all through the cold months of the year, when you don't necessarily want a half wine, half beer rosé thing, I kind of think that almost hurts it. Some of us have a core. I mean, there are lots of core saisons. I say as I can't think of one off the top of my head. I know Dandy has one. We don't sell it here in the shop because Dandy doesn't sell very well. Man, you're really putting me on the spot here, Eric, since I said yes. Which in a sense means I'm putting myself on the spot. There are definitely breweries that have core saisons. I just can't think of one off the top of my head. Aaron, anything like most of the saisons we've done have been seasonals. Most of my favorite saisons I have are always seasonals. So I'm looking for the color because of Craig's comment. A little bit of a golden barley overtone on this. No, I get the pink mostly, but that's just probably the lighting. Is there a science reason why Belgian yeast is so polarizing? I don't think so. I mean, Belgian yeast kind of tastes very peppery and very plasticky and very oily for a lot of people. And even people like myself who really like Belgian yeast, it does have that certain plasticky note. And that's just what Belgian yeast smells like. Either you like it or you don't. You know, I actually like going in to get like my winter tires changed over because I like the way a tire store smells. I like those sorts of aromas.
Weird.
I am weird. That's fair. Yes.
The way Costco like coats your mouth when you walk in.
I think all of Costco smells like tires, or like the tire department.
You just walk in. I don't know.
The whole place smells like
so much plastic. I'm not sure. Maybe it's like a rubber thing.
I don't know. My big sensory thing with Costco isn't the smell. It's actually the humming of those really specific giant lights they have hanging from the ceiling.
Yeah.
They have a very specific high-pitched sound
Yeah.
that's kind of like my defining sensory Costco experience is the lights more than the smell.
Interesting. Mine are the sausage samples.
The sausage samples? Sausage sample. Are you sampling the sausage sample so you can repeat?
Yeah.
Yeah, figured you would be.
Using that delay to my.
Okay, you didn't see Belgian yeast at tire store, but tell me I'm wrong. Tell me that doesn't smell like brand new like rubber tires. It's right there for me in my like sensory memory.
The tire store did not see that. Canadian Tire dollar store. Exactly. Just loaded with plastic. I don't know.
I can kind of see the dollar store thing.
Canadian Tire too.
Yeah?
Sure what it is.
Apparently I need to go to the Canadian Tire and Costco and the dollar store and sniff around just to get what everybody's getting on that.
Sorry, everybody. Don't you
All right, well.
had it mixed up.
No, I think we've come to an end here.
Yeah, we're toast.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron.
You're welcome.
This was wonderful.
Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you to everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
We will see you on Friday night for Cantankerous Cocktails. We will, and hopefully Mike will actually say something. And if not, we will see you next week for Establishment with someone, one of 4 or 5 different people. We will see which one from Establishment joining us. For this Wednesday night, I'm Kyle with Andrew Hilton. That's been Aaron with Bird Media. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.